Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order. Pursuant to Committee Rule 5B and House Rule 11-2H4, the Chair announces that he may postpone further proceedings today on any question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Our first item for consideration is the Oversight and Government Reform Committee report entitled United States Secret Service, an Agency in Crisis. Pursuant to Clause 1B2 of House Rule 11, the report is considered as read, and the clerk will designate the report.
Committee report, United States Secret Service, an Agency in Crisis.
Chair recognizes myself for 5 minutes to discuss this report. And at the onset, let me say that one of the things that I think makes this work is the good bipartisan work that has been done on this, particularly at the staff level. A number of members involved and engaged in this topic. This is an agency, the Secret Service, that is in crisis. There is exceptionally low morale, one of the lowest in all of the Federal Government. There is a lack of accountability, and it is a mission that is a no-fail mission. This is, as I was growing up, the elite agency, the agency that you would model yourself after. Between the G-men and the FBI and the Secret Service, this is supposed to be the best of the best. The overwhelming majority of people who work at the Secret Service day in and day out put their lives on the line for this country, to protect this country. We cannot thank them enough for the amazing job that they do, the hours, the dedication, the professionalism that they put into it. But unfortunately, the mismanagement, the lack of morale, the lack of accountability, the systems that are lacking have caused a scenario where a lot of our really good people are leaving. They're leaving because they're frustrated. They're leaving because they know how bad it is. I can tell you, as the Chairman of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, the #1 area in which we get whistleblowers is the Secret Service. And as I've told the White House and others time and time again, if I know more about what's going on in your agency, you have a problem. And we are supposed to provide not only oversight, but we're also supposed to be the agency, the Committee of Government Reform. And so this report that's laid out before us not only is an analysis of what we've been able to see and capture and understand, but also some very serious recommendations that we all need to, I think, take into account. And I don't think that this is the end. I think in many ways this is the beginning. This is the opportunity for us as a body in a bipartisan way to work to do the government reform that we ought to do. There are important committees of jurisdiction, most notably the Judiciary Committee. You also have interest in Homeland Security and certainly the appropriations process. You also have the United States Senate that we need to work with. I invite all members on both sides of this aisle to work with this and make the alterations and the enhancements necessary so that this can continue to be the elite agency that we have to have it. I do also hope that the Secret Service and Homeland Security, Secretary Johnson in particular, will take the findings and recommendations in this report seriously. The agency has a long history of covering up its mistakes. It's unhealthy for the agency, and it's not safe for the President of the United States. They are not above oversight. I happen to believe in my core that oversight is a good thing. It's part of what makes the United States different than most every other nation on the face of the planet. We do take a good, hard, critical look at ourselves in an effort to improve. And this is an agency that has not had vigorous or even cursory oversight over the past few decades. In late 2014, the Secret Service was experiencing a security breach on what was almost a weekly basis. The report details major breakdowns in the President's September 16, 2014 visit to the Centers for Disease Control. Not only did the Secret Service fail to protect the President on that date, they failed to be candid about the incident with the President, the Congress, and the American people. The breakdown at the Centers for Disease Control occurred 3 days before an individual jumped the White House fence and made it all the way into the residence. And if you recall, when the American people were told what happened, they weren't told the truth. They were told that he got to the door. Oh, he got just inside the door. And then next thing we came to learn is he got quite far into the building itself. 8 days after the fence jumping incident, a man impersonating a member of Congress entered backstage, walked up to the President, and had a conversation at the Congressional Black Caucus dinner. 6 days later, in an almost identical set of events, a woman gained unauthorized backstage access to the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Gala. 6 days later in Los Angeles, Secret Service failed to screen an individual carrying a bag into a hotel where the President was staying. And breaches like this do not bode well for the safety of the President and do not give the American people the confidence that this agency and that the American people need. And these are just the incidents we know about. One of my deep concerns is that the inevitability of failure by a would-be perpetrator has been diminished. There ought to be no doubt in anybody's mind that if you try to get close to the President, if you try to get into the White House, you are going to be taken down. That's what should happen, and it should happen every time. It's difficult for Congress to regain confidence in an agency when the agency has routinely misled Congress. Our investigation found that 3 directors, Director Sullivan, Director Pearson, and Director Clancy, provided inaccurate or incomplete information to Congress. I think it's misleading. Some would call it false, but it certainly wasn't full and complete. Secret Service must begin honest and thorough after-action reviews of security incidents. These will help the agency in an accountable way train future generations of personnel and keep the current workforce in check. Our investigation also found that people jumping the White House fence is nothing new. We know that it's going to happen. It's happened for decades. But we found that over the last 10 years, 31 individuals were arrested for actually jumping the fence, yet only 4 went to jail. There hasn't been much of a consequence, and that is something that certainly needs to. Above all, our report reveals the Secret Service is experiencing a staffing crisis. An independent panel, and I was a little hesitant about this because I was concerned that the Secretary of Homeland Security went out there and just appointed this panel. And we heard testimony from that panel, and I got to tell you, they were impressive, they were thorough, but they were also clear in the recommendations that they made. I was as impressed with their work as I could possibly be. This Protective Mission Panel recommended the Secret Service hire an additional 85 agents and 200 in the Uniform Division officers. Since then, the Secret Service has lost more employees than it's hired. And this is at a time when we're turning the corner into 2016 and you have massive needs upon the Secret Service. In the midst of a new presidential campaign, multiple candidates hitting 3, 4, 5 states in a day, unbelievable stress, big events, happen at rapid fire. These put a tremendous stress on the Secret Service themselves. Secret Service has got to staff up. There needs to be a process. They also need more funding. Now, there will be some vigorous discussion about funding, but for the last 2 years, the Congress actually appropriated more money than the President asked for. But we've had it both ways, and I think we're very united, at least myself and the ranking member, in saying we have got to fund the Secret Service at the level that the President has requested. I don't think we have any choice. This is too important of a mission. Now, from my vantage point, funding alone is not going to solve their problems. That is not going to be the excuse that they use to come back before Congress and the American people and say, well, we couldn't get our mission done. There are certain things they need. They need a mock White House. We have, when the fence jumping incident happened, you have people that work at the Secret Service who've never been in the White House. My wife's been in the White House. You take a tour of the White House. You sign up and go walk through. But there are people who work at the Secret Service who've never been in the White House. They literally go out to a field with spray paint and practice saying, well, this is where this wall would be and this is where the stairs would be. Bring them in there in a mock scenario and run through every possible scenario they could think about. That seems reasonable. It's about an $8 million expenditure, and it's something I think is a very worthwhile expenditure. But going back to my point that dollars alone are not going to solve this problem, in the midst of their staffing needs, the Secret Service detailed former Director Alvin Smith to the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, still paying him his $183,000 a year salary. He recently retired, but the agency looks at somebody who's problematic and just says, well, we'll just detail them because, we want to maximize their retirement benefits, while simultaneously saying, well, we need more dollars. That's not what we're supposed to be doing around here. These are precious resources. It's hard for the Secret Service to come and justify an expenditure when they say, well, but we have people at the highest levels and the biggest dollars. We want to maximize their retirement benefits, so, we really have to keep them on board, but give us more money. That doesn't happen in the private sector. It shouldn't happen here. We're also going to have to look at what we did with the Pope's visit. I think the visit by the Pope, by all accounts, the Secret Service should be praised for good quality work. The execution of that mission happened because they were able to bring in resources from other departments and agencies. That does happen on a routine basis. I am personally suggesting, although it's not detailed in this greatest specificity in the report, I do think in order to meet the immediate staffing needs, even if the Secret Service, by the way, were to hire immediately and staff up, you can't just put them on the front lines right away. It takes months to get an agent or an officer up to speed. But perhaps what we should do is lean on the United States military, the FBI, the U.S. Marshals, others, to be assigned or detailed to the Secret Service for the next 12 months so that they can make it through the presidential election. We need people who can wield a gun, know what they're doing, and be trusted. And these other departments and agencies have these types of people. I think the President, for the good of the country, should call upon these people to spend a year and spend time with the Secret Service to help them out. Our report recommends that some of these missions that the Secret Service involved with also be shed. If you look, and the report details this, on what do they think they do, it is not necessarily the protective mission that they put up first. They have important cyber responsibilities, credit card fraud, and those types of things. But I think we, in a bipartisan way, and I know Mr. Conley in particular and others have spent time with us working on the idea that maybe we should take the investigative side of some of those financial crimes, give that, say, to maybe the FBI, and let the Secret Service focus on its core mission of being a protective detail. And I want to work closely with the Secret Service and Jay Johnson, Security Secretary, with those recommendations. Again, and do so on a bipartisan basis. And let me conclude by saying, again, it has been a good exercise, a positive endeavor to work with Mr. Cummings. He has a very talented and capable staff. Valerie Shen and Sally, will pronounce her name properly, and Tim Lynch have all been very helpful to our staff. On our side of the aisle, I could not be more proud of the amazing work and time and dedication that Rachel Weaver, in part, has put into this. She has spent, I cannot even begin to tell you how many years and hours into this effort. Tristan Levitt, Mike Howell, Michaela Carr, Ryan Little, M.J. Henshaw. There's a lot of people that have spent time on this and poured their hearts and soul into it as well. But I'd say to, again, our members and staff on both sides of the aisle, as well as Mr. Cummings, this is the beginning, because now we have to do some of the hard work and put some of this into motion. But it's proud of this report. I urge our members to vote in support of it. And now I'd like to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And let me start by commending you for the bipartisan way you have conducted this hearing. And I, too, share your thanks and extend my thanks to the staff, both staffs that worked very closely together on this. And to, I know Rachel Weaver has probably given half of her time over the course of time to look into this. And I want to thank her in particular for all that she has done. He asked us to join as partners in this effort. You consulted with us regarding requests for documents, and you invited us to meetings and briefings over the past year, including with some whistleblowers. You also asked for our input in drafting this report. For the past several weeks, including over the Thanksgiving holiday, our staffs worked to make sure that every member of our committee could support this report. In the words of another author, he said, we don't have time to move to common ground. We must move to higher ground. And I will thank you forever for taking our committee with regard to this effort to higher ground. Your approach stands in stark contrast to the ways that things were done with this committee for several years before you became chairman. Your bipartisan approach has had a number of positive effects. It encouraged all committee members to be invested in our work. It produced what I believe is a much better final product, and most importantly, it now conveys to the agency a united and unanimous call to action. Of course, we did not agree on everything, and there were bumps along the road. But we listened to each other, and we identified those findings and recommendations we could all agree on. But most importantly, we all based our discussions and our input on a culture of integrity and respect, and that I appreciate. As a result, I believe this report makes a much stronger impact than if it were a partisan and unvetted staff report without the full buy-in of this entire committee. Turning to the report, it paints a distressing picture of an agency in crisis. I was outraged when I read some of the emails between these Secret Service employees. Some were sent to dozens and dozens of people with a brazenness that suggests deplorable behavior which was widely tolerated. There is simply no excuse for this kind of behavior, especially among individuals we expect to be the most elite law enforcement officials of the elite. The report also demonstrates that the agency has been mismanaged for years, and it will take a strong bipartisan effort to restore it. I do believe that the Secret Service can do that. They must resurrect its reputation, but then they must do something else. They must guard that reputation. I am thoroughly convinced that one of the reasons why the Secret Service has been so effective in the past has been based on the reputation. And you're right, Mr. Chairman. No one should even imagining that they can get past the veil of protection the Secret Service is sworn to represent. For too long, the agency has been slipping into a culture of not only mediocrity, but complacency. The report makes several key findings that are particularly important. The report finds that the Secret Service is facing a staffing crisis that began in 2011 when Congress passed the Budget Control Act. In that year, Congress set a terrible new record by providing the Secret Service with $56 million less than the President requested. $56 million is a lot of money. That deficit was the largest single-year difference between a President's request and a congressional appropriation for any year for which the committee obtained data. 2 years later, in 2013, Congress beat this notorious historical record. It approved $77 million less than the President requested. In fact, from 2011 to 2013, Congress approved a total of $111 $165 million less than the amounts the President requested for the Secret Service. As a result, staffing dropped off a cliff, with major declines in every single year from 2011 until today. Before I continue, let me make one thing abundantly clear. Budget cuts and staff declines absolutely is no way to justify some of the activities that are recounted in this report. As I said, there's simply no excuse, absolutely none, for some of the unacceptable behavior we have seen. However, the cumulative effects of making some of the biggest budget cuts in history, slashing staffing levels by hundreds, overburdening agents and officers, demanding excessive overtime, yanking personnel from one location to another, and cutting back on critical, very critical training. All of these forces have taken their toll on the Secret Service workforce. They degrade the mission, reduce effectiveness, impair morale, aggravate attrition, and deter the best and the brightest from even applying to serve the agency. Yesterday, the Partnership for Public Service issued its annual report on the best places to work in the federal government. Of the 320 different offices and agencies surveyed, the Secret Service ranked number 319. Hello, number 319 out of 320. Almost dead last. This is what needs to change. I'm encouraged that our report recommends full funding of the President's budget requests, provided that the Secret Service implements the reforms necessary to address these challenges. And let me say this, Mr. Chairman, and I share your view and you share mine, that the Secret Service must have the money it needs. But the Secret Service must use that money effectively and efficiently. It's one thing to make sure you have your officers, both uniform and those that are not uniform. It's another thing to also make sure that the administrative personnel are fully functioning and at full staff. And so, because they are the support system for everybody else. We need a strong and bipartisan commitment to helping this agency and its workforce. We need to focus on measures to promote a renewed sense of pride among individuals who dedicate their careers and their lives to this critical mission. And to the members of the Secret Service, I say to you, with this committee, you have a partner, but you also have a partner that will do everything in our power to oversee what is being done. And I beg you, if you do not want to go along with the mission of the Secret Service, to be the elite of the elite, to be the most well-known protective agency in the world, then perhaps you need another job. And so for these reasons, I urge all members to support this bipartisan report. And again, Mr. Chairman, I thank my staff, I thank your staff, and all of those people that took so much time. And I also thank the whistleblowers, because they've helped us tremendously in focusing in on many of the problems. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I concur with those comments. Does any other member wish to speak on the report? Mr. Heiss of Georgia is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to commend you and the ranking member and the committee staff for the work that they have put into this investigation and the final report. One of the incidents that is exhaustively covered in this report and that was briefly mentioned a few moments ago was the failure of the Secret Service to conduct proper due diligence during the President's visit to the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta on September 16, 2014. Despite being given advance notice in writing that all the security guards at the CDC would be armed during the visit, the Secret Service did not ask for and thus did not even obtain the names of those security guards, and therefore there were no background checks that were run on those guards by the Secret Service. As a result, the President actually rode on an elevator with an armed, unvetted guard with a criminal history, including reckless conduct with a gun, that resulted from an incident where he fired shots at a car with a 3-year-old in the car. That armed guard would later breach a Secret Service security formation in an attempt to take pictures of the President. So when the guard was interviewed after that breach, his supervisor at the CDC asked for the gun, and it was only at that point that the Secret Service agents in the room actually became aware that the guard was armed, as were all the other guards that day. So the Secret Service then conducted an after-action review, and in that review they falsely suggested that the CDC officials were at fault for not sending the required information. But it was not the responsibility of the CDC officials to ensure that background checks were run. It was the responsibility of the Secret Service and the Secret Service alone. It is crystal clear from that incident that the Secret Service did not do its job and check the information that the CDC sent them. This breach of protocol is indicative of a pattern, a dangerous pattern of both human error and insufficient processes. So this committee's report contains a recommendation for the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General to review the Secret Service's advanced procedures and policies for allowing armed individuals near the President. And I personally absolutely concur with this recommendation. It's absolutely essential that the Secret Service have the best protocols in place when it comes particularly to protecting our President. And more important, they must follow the protocol that is in place. And quite frankly, last year, we were very fortunate. We were lucky that the President was not harmed, but we cannot rely on luck moving forward. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and thank you.
Thank the gentleman.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lynch of Massachusetts is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to join the chorus here in thanking you and thanking the ranking member for your guidance during this whole process. And I want to amplify both of your comments that this is not the end. This report in no way signifies the end of this process. This is really the ranking member of the National Security Subcommittee. I'd like to express my strong support for our committee report. It has pointed out many flaws, but after action needs to happen. This report is certainly indicative of the bipartisanship, the diligence and leadership with which you and the ranking member, Cummings, have led our investigation into the series of security breaches involving the U.S. Secret Service over the past several years. It also very much reflects the core finding of this committee and our extensive Secret Service investigation, that long-standing budgetary and systemic challenges have seriously impeded the ability of our dedicated Secret Service workforce to carry out the agency's core protection mission. As evidenced by the series of oversight hearings that we have held over the past 2 Congresses, the mission of this critical Federal agency has been severely undermined by previous and glaring mismanagement, as well as an entrenched agency culture. That's the root of this. There's a culture here that is dismissive of the core obligations, and as the ranking member said, shortfalls in funding are in any way, an excuse for some of the conduct that we have seen and some of the complete lack of diligence and just basic security on behalf of the agency for the President and his family. It is also quite clear that the Secret Service has been impacted by sequestration-related budget cuts and the uncertain funding that results when Congress relies on temporary continuing resolutions. As one primary example of the security challenges that have given rise to this committee's bipartisan effort to reform the Secret Service, I just want to point out one aspect of this, and that is the agency's 72-hour video retention policy that's in place, and it was in place at the time of the March 4th incidents at the White House complex involving the 2 agents that came back after a party who drove through an active bomb threat investigation scene. In the course of our briefings and the March 24th hearing with Director Clancy, we learned it was the agency policy to routinely overwrite, to scrub the security camera footage after only 72 hours. That isn't evidence production. That is evidence destruction. That posed a serious challenge to the agency and Congress in reviewing the incident. That Director Clancy also informed us that he did not receive notice about that incident until 5 days later. That's a couple of days after they scrubbed the tapes. As reported by the Department of Homeland Security Inspector Roth in his incident report, this 72-hour time period was developed with the Secret Service Office of Chief Counsel in 2012, and that, quote, a longer retention period was not used because it was believed that security threats at the White House were immediately known and would not need to be preserved. Are you kidding me? The 2011 report of the drive-by shooting at the White House, we didn't know about it for 3 years. 3 years. And the White House Secret Service didn't know about it for 3 days. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done here. Incredibly, I.G. Roth also explained that when the Secret Service video surveillance system was originally installed at the White House complex in 2007, it had a 24-hour, one-day recording retention requirement. Director Clancy has subsequently testified that the Secret Service has expanded its video retention period from 72 hours to 7 days. 7 days of retained video at the White House. McDonald's has 30 days. Burger King has 30 days. Natick High School in Massachusetts has 30 days. Are you kidding me? And the fact that they hold the tapes and don't disclose them to the public or to the Congress, they're going to keep them for 7 days. This part, that part of the report I completely reject. I cannot sign on to that we're going to have a 7-day retention period. They are concealing evidence from the Oversight Committee in Congress. They are deliberately concealing it, and that's the culture here. So I can't sign on to that. I know there's a further commitment that we're going to extend that at some point. That's what they're saying. They're saying, let me read what they say. Even though 7 days does not come close to best practices employed by most public and private entities, they will endeavor to extend the period at a future date. So we got to stay on them on that, and I'm not buying that. As I said before, the 2011 drive-by by Mr. Ortega-Hernandez wasn't made public in 2014. As long as they're hiding the ball from us, we can't let them go. You know, we got to have the information, and they've got to retain it longer. Given the inadequacy of the agency's video retention policy, I am pleased that the committee that they're urging the Secret Service to conform with the public and private sector best practices, and that's where I think we need to go.
Would the gentleman yield?
Sure, I would. Sure, I would.
I just talked to the chair. Thank you for yielding. I was just talking to the chairman, and I think we both agree that 7-day policy is not good, and we're going to work together to try to make sure we address that, because you're absolutely right.
No, thank you. And look, I'm just pointing about the things I can't. The one thing I cannot, sign on to. I just want to put it on the record. That's all. You've done a remarkable job here, and there's some classified things we can't even talk about that you two gentlemen have instituted here that had just been going on for years and years and years. So I don't want this to be seen as a criticism of your work. You've done unbelievable work, especially with a culture of resistance that we've had from the Secret Service. So believe me, I'm on board. I'm on the same page. You should be congratulated for your work, and I know how difficult it was. But I think we need to stay on them on this aspect of it. Interestingly enough, the FBI lab in 2005 recommended a 31-day retention period. The FBI lab. So. It's just all the evidence points to we got to be smarter than this. And remember what's at stake here. The President, his family, folks at the White House, and the world in which we live. I think we're whistling through the graveyard here in a way by not addressing this or making them address it more forcefully. Lastly, I want to thank the Oversight Committee staff for putting up with me. Including Mike Howell and Tristan Levitt of the majority staff, and Valerie Shen and Sally Williamson and Tim Lynch of the minority staff in overlation. And I urge otherwise they're taking me out of here in cuffs. And I do urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this report. It's a good report. We got work to do, but this is a good report. And I congratulate the ranking member and the chairman, not only on the content of this report, but also the manner in which you led this committee. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and I appreciate the kind comments, and I do think you bring up an important point. We will continue to work with you on those. And you also noted something I think it's important, too, is a lot of this was made available because of the good work by the Inspector General and their staff. They did a lot of good work, and were able to get in and see things that we couldn't have seen.
And the Washington Post.
Yes.
They actually did a great job as well.
There was some, Carol Lenig and some of the others were very valuable but that's not the way we should hear about it. They've done great report. There's a reason why they have such a storied reputation, but we, again, will continue. Does any other member wish to speak on the report?
Mr. Chairman, I would.
Mr. Micah from Florida will recognize, and we'll come to Mr. Walker after that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the report does have some findings that I think we can all agree on. We've hashed and rehashed. I've read through all the recommendations, and there are some good recommendations in here that mostly it's saying what Secret Service must do. But I think the report misses the mark on what we need to do as a Congress, having spoken with some of the former directors and those involved of the basic problems of the agency. And one is, well, there are three things that Congress needs to do. One is upgrade the requirements for actual even employment as an agent, and we've dumbed down the agency. That needs to be done by Congress. The second one is to allow for retention of some of the senior agents. We found one of the problems is by the time they get to a certain level of training and experience, they're forced out. That needs to be changed by law. Again, Congress's responsibility. The third, absolutely essential, I can tell you, unless you do this, others will be back here. We can record this hearing, and you'll hear it again, unless they're made an exempt service with the ability to hire and fire personnel. You will have the same problems over and over. It's not just what we see in Secret Service. You can take the Veterans Administration, you can take IRS, you can take GSA, but until you have the ability to hire and fire and hold people accountable, you're just whistling Dixie. And unfortunately, that's what we're doing here. The reports are all fine and good, but Congress needs to act. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, let me thank you and the ranking member and our respective staffs in the majority and minority for a fine piece of work, and really something this committee should have been doing a lot more of in the past. And I want to thank you both for setting a different tone, where we're making, I think, a very signaled contribution in terms of government reform and government oversight. That's our mission. And so I thank you for setting that tone and for the serious piece of work that's in front of us. Congressman Lynch, I think, put his finger on something that is absolutely true, irrespective of the various pieces of this story, and that is, this is about a culture. There's nothing harder institutionally than trying to actually change a culture. And that's going to be a really difficult challenge ahead. There are pieces we can influence and we can control, but at the end of the day, that's about leadership at the top in the agency in wrenching a culture into something that's more transparent, more accountable, more effective. Two pieces I want to highlight. One is, it is true that a lot of the problems that have been documented with Secret Service aren't just about money. But as the ranking member pointed out, you can't, with a straight face, pretend, however, that we're not part of the problem, too. when you have the largest gap in history, $165 million over a several-year period between the requested budget and the appropriated budget, you can't deny that money is also part of the problem, especially if you're concerned about recruiting the best and retaining them. And that is in our power to change. And I hope, upon reflection, we will do so. And I was heartened to hear the Chairman call for additional resources as part of the solution. And then secondly, I want to highlight something that the Chairman pointed out, and that has to do with, in a sense, the duality of mission. People sometimes overlook the fact that the Secret Service has a legacy mission of investigating sophisticated financial crimes. It's on their website. And in fact, when you look at some of their own pronouncements, it seems to predominate their sense of their mission. I don't think most of us think that's fully appropriate today. And so I echo the Chairman's call for re-examining the core mission of the Secret Service as part of this investigation, as part of this report, as part of the reforms that flow. So thank you for this piece of work. Thank you for bringing us together, and I look forward to fully supporting the recommendations. And I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After the misconduct with prostitutes in Cartagena, Colombia became known in 2012, the Secret Service Director at the time, Mark Sullivan, assured Congress that this was not systematic or a cultural issue. He said the Secret Service had zero tolerance for this type of behavior. Unfortunately, the events highlighted by this report prove otherwise. Probably one of the more surreal moments that I've had serving here in Washington, D.C. was sitting in this room and discovering that the penalty for such behavior and such actions was a 2-week paid leave of absence. It is obvious that the Secret Service has a problem, a culture promoting a lack of accountability. This report shows a few things. One, how many senior employees caught committing misconduct were allowed to simply retire or worked out employment agreements with the agency, and also revealed legacy employees who are relatives or current or former employees who are also treated differently, allegedly, but we believe there's concrete evidence in this report. Finally, we saw an example of this with the incident that the gentleman from Massachusetts was simply referring to just a few minutes ago, of March 4th, 2015, just earlier this year, where 2 intoxicated senior supervisors ignored roadblocks, took in their own discretion to move a barrel 5 feet in order to get into the White House grounds. Their vehicle came within inches of a suspected bomb that was awaiting bomb squad inspection. Most employees who are investigated for misconduct have their security clearances suspended while the investigation is ongoing. However, this report notes that instead of revoking those, security clearance officials were told to leave the clearances of these 2 supervisors during this investigation. Now, both supervisors happen to be friends with Director Clancy, and these agency favorites got preferential treatment. This kind of culture is simply unacceptable. I believe the American people deserve and are asking for more. However, it has become commonplace in this administration, the administration that promised us transparency. Unlike regular citizens or here rank-and-file officers, the rules simply do not apply to the higher-ups in the Obama administration. These officials and Secret Service managers and supervisors need to be held accountable just like everyone else. In fact, they should be held to a higher standard. I hope the Secret Service takes this report and its findings seriously. We cannot afford to let this kind of culture linger any longer. I thank the Chairman, staffs of the minorities, as well, the Inspector General, for doing such a yeoman's work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The criticism of the Secret Service has been appropriately bipartisan. They're a very easy target. When you have another jumper on Thanksgiving Day, as the President and his family are having Thanksgiving dinner, they deserve all the criticism we can give them. In the age or the era of ISIL, the last thing we need is to send the message that we cannot even protect the home of the president. This is an area of particularly concern and interest. It is one of the great First Amendment areas of the United States. You know, I don't know why people don't use their First Amendment rights and come more often to the Capitol. Even when they have a grievance against the Congress, somehow the White House becomes a symbolic place. They go to the White House. And of course, it's a tourist mecca here, and so I have a very special interest because 20 million people a year come to the nation's capital. Imagine being told that, sorry, we can't assure that we can protect the White House, so you can't get very close to it. People had to be put on the other side of the street for a few days there after the most recent jumper. I'm pleased that they're back again. The spikes interested me because I was for the spikes, temporary though they were, because it's going to take some time for that fence to be fixed, and it seems to me that that was a very good way temporarily to allow people to get closer to the fence. And I'll be, goodness sakes, if this jumper didn't manage to jump over that fence, and I must say with great ease, with a flag wrapped around him and papers in his teeth. My goodness. When I met with the Secret Service, I asked them that if they want to, in fact, try out the fence. We have plenty of high jumpers, high school students and college students here, who I think would be better testers than whoever tested those spikes. I do agree with Mr. Connolly, and because they're a very easy target, we've had target practice on them, taking no responsibility for what has happened to the Secret Service over the past several years. I was really quite astounded. During our several hearings, they never said a word about how many they were down in officers. In this last appropriation, they did get 150 uniform officers. They didn't do anything for them because of the retirements and departures in prior years. So there was no net increase, even with the increase they got in the last appropriation. They have 12 classes of agents. If the next appropriation goes through and 12 classes, that's 12. Imagine how much they must be down. That's 12 different classes of agents, 12 different classes of officers. Sequester tore the heart out of the Secret Service. That's if their budget is as they imagine it will be in 2016. Even with those 12 classes, it'll take 5 years for the Secret Service to get back to where they were. So I tell you, when we're going to do, if we do sequesters or other cuts in the future, I hope we bear in mind that the police forces deserve very special attention and perhaps some exemption from those cuts. The Secret Service is supposed to do what it has to do no matter what its personnel, but we also have an obligation as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentlewoman yields back. Do any other members wish to speak on the report? Mr. Cummings.
Mr. Chairman, may I be recognized for a brief request?
Sure.
Yesterday, we received a letter from the Secret Service responding to our report. It's a short letter, but it mentions several areas of the report that the Secret Service believes are inaccurate or need greater context. To be fair, I ask unanimous consent that yesterday's letter from the Secret Service be made a part of the official record for today's business meeting.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
Any other members wish to speak on the report? Do any members wish to offer an amendment to the report? If none, the question is now on the adoption and favorably reporting the committee report to the House of Representatives. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the report is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. In the interest of time, we're going to move the following bills under a unanimous consent agreement. We do have a member that we're going to recognize who have some comments, but we have consulted with the minority members on all sides, and we've agreed to move these bipartisan bills expeditiously. I would ask unanimous consent that the committee report on the following bills to the House of Representatives: H.R. 4180, the Fraud Reduction and Data Analytics Act of 2015, and Senate Bill 1698, the Treatment of Certain Payments in Eugenics Compensation Act. And I ask unanimous consent that the committee favorably report the following postal naming bills to the House: H.R. 1132, H.R. 2458, H.R. 3735, and H.R. 4046. Do any members wish to speak on any of these bills?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak on the Senate Bill 1698.
Mr. Walker is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Today we address one of the darkest chapters in modern Americans' history. During the 20th century, encouraged by people such as Margaret Sanger, a majority of state governments unjustly and unconscionably operated eugenics programs to sterilize by force or coercion individuals that they deemed unfit to have children. Operating between 1929 through 1974, North Carolina's program was labeled as one of the more aggressive. It ruthlessly targeted African Americans, the undereducated, needy, and the disabled. While no apology, amount of money, or benefit can ever return what was lost, some states, including North Carolina, have now rightfully sought to acknowledge the grievous injustice and make restitution to these victims. However, this attempt has resulted in unintended burdens for eugenics victims. Compensation counts against one's eligibility for federal benefits. So, instead of helping the victims, these payments may result in the denial of the federal benefits to which they are entitled. Therefore, I am pleased that Senator Tillis and Senator Burr introduced this legislation to close this unintended loophole, and I heartily support their efforts. While restitution to victims and their loved ones can never truly heal the scars caused by these eugenics programs, I encourage other states to acknowledge and seek to right this injustice caused by their programs and policies. This bill should remind us that every life is precious. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. And Mr. Patrick McHenry has done some very good work on this, and I appreciate your attention to this as well. Mr. Cummings is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you, and I'm going to address Bills 1698 and 4180. With regard to 1698, Mr. Chairman, beginning in the early 20th century, more than 30 states passed eugenics and compulsory sterilization laws. These laws resulted in the involuntary sterilization of more than 60,000 Americans. These horrific and discriminatory laws targeted people with disabilities, single mothers, African Americans, and children from poor families. In 2013, North Carolina passed legislation that sets aside $10 million to compensate the living victims of its eugenics programs. As of January of this year, 220 victims have been awarded approximately $20,000 apiece. If no further surviving victims are identified, the remainder of the state funds will be divided among the known victims. This will bring each victim's total compensation to approximately $45,500. Virginia passed legislation earlier this year awarding $25,000 to its surviving eugenics victims. Unfortunately, under current law, these compensation payments could render individuals determined by income thresholds. For instance, an individual could lose his or her eligibility for Medicaid, the Supplemental Nutrition Program, unemployment, or disability benefits. This is because payments aimed at righting these past eugenics wrongs could raise their incomes above program eligibility levels. Most eugenics victims were poor and disadvantaged in the early 20th century. Unfortunately, many remain so today and rely on these benefits to make ends meet. The bill before us today would ensure that payments from state eugenics programs are excluded from eligibility determinations for federal benefits. We cannot go back and erase the past, but the legislation before us today will at least ensure that the victims of state eugenics programs receive the benefits they deserve. And now, as to House Bill 4180, the Fraud Reduction and Data Analytics Act is designed to strengthen federal agency efforts to combat financial fraud. Congress has passed a number of laws in the past few years aimed at curbing improper payments. Fraud in this area is especially pernicious. It stems not from innocent mistakes, but from the willful intent to steal or misuse taxpayer dollars. Fraud reduction strategies help reduce these crimes. The Government Accountability Office and Inspector Generals have recommended that agencies implement fraud reduction strategies in the past. For example, the GAO recently published a framework for managing fraud risks in federal programs. The bill before us would require the Director of the Office of Management and Budget to consult with the GAO to develop anti-fraud guidance for federal agencies and then monitor the implementation of that guidance. The bill would also require the establishment of a working group of agency chief financial officers chaired by OMB. This working group would share these practices and help disseminate new anti-fraud techniques. The working group would also be required to develop a plan for establishing an interagency library of analytic tools and data sets for agencies and IGs to use in fighting fraud. In developing this plan, I believe the working group should look to the model of the Recovery Operations Center, which was developed to monitor spending under the Recovery Act of 2009, and which has unfortunately ceased operations. These are common sense steps toward solving a very serious problem that everyone should support. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I appreciate the comments on the Fraud Reduction Act introduced by our own Mark Meadows and the good work that he's done in championing this bill and bringing it before us and moving it here to the floor of the House and having it passed sooner rather than later. Does any other member wish to speak on these bills? Mr. Conley is now recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chair. I just want to commend my friend Mark Meadows for his leadership on this bill of H.R. 4180, and I'm proud to be an original co-sponsor. Improper payments has been something this committee has been on for quite some time. You know, it's now estimated that the total category is worth of somewhere around $125 billion a year. If you multiply that times 10, that's $1.25 trillion. That exceeds the entire cost of sequestration over the same time period, simply in improper payments. This is something we can do something about. This is something the Federal Government can do something about. And so I really am pleased that we're moving forward on this. And there are various pieces, as you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, such as the Do Not Pay initiative, that really can yield considerable savings. That one initiative saved $2 billion in the first year we implemented it. So again, in the category of oversight and reform, this bill is a classic example of the positive contribution this committee can make. And again, I thank my friend and colleague, Mr. Meadows, moving this legislation. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We now recognize the author of that bill, Mr. Meadows, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. Thank you for holding this markup and considering this particular piece of legislation. But my thank you also goes to my good friend, Mr. Conley. We shared the podium earlier today on another piece of legislation that has become law that is working for accountability, FATARA, under this particular oversight and government reforms responsibility. And it is the kind of bipartisan efforts and the kind words of the ranking member as well that we should be doing more of. And so it is, you know, when we get improper payments of $120 plus billion dollars. Those dollars could be worked and put to use in many other ways, and so hopefully this is the start of actually not only becoming more resources in the manner they're intended. I thank the chairman for his leadership, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman and the good work that he's done on this bill. Any other members wish to offer comments on these bills? We do have a unanimous consent request. Without objection, hearing none, the bills are ordered favorably reported to the House. Without objection, pursuant to Clause 2L of House Rule 11, members will have 2 days to submit their views on the report considered today. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be allowed to make necessary technical and conforming changes to the report, and bills ordered reported today subject to the approval of the minority. Hearing no objection, so ordered. If there are no further business without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you.